My name is Lennart Hernander. I am based in Kampala in Uganda, where ACT Church of Sweden, which is the development and humanitarian part of Church of Sweden, have an office where we manage all our partner collaboration and projects in Africa. So my role is to head the office in Kampala and manage our projects and our partner collaboration in Africa. The Church of Sweden have been working in Kakuma refugee camp in northwest Kenya since the camp was first set up in 1992, when the what is known as the Lost Boys of Sudan came across the border and were received in that part of Kenya. And at that time, it was the called Church of Sweden Aid, or Lutherhjälpen in Swedish, who were there together with a couple of other partners and together with the Lutheran World Federation, which we are a member of, receiving these young boys from Sudan at that time. And since then, we have been working in the camp with receiving refugees and with support in different ways over the years. A lot of our focus is on psychosocial support, mental health and psychosocial support. We also work with protection and a few other sectors like vocational training, for instance, is one of our focuses. But we have been working there now since 1992.
Okay, we in our organization, the Fourth World, are particularly engaged in minorities and indigenous populations.
Yes.
And I know that in this area, in Kakuma, they're also living the Turkana people, who also
Yes.
belong to a minority. And I wonder how this fact affect the relationship between the refugees in Kakuma and the local population there. What
Yes.
kind of challenges, cooperations, or conflicts might emerge from such a situation then?
Yes. So the Turkana host community, we talk about host community, or the population where the camp is set up, is also, as you say, it's a marginalized community in Kenya with a lot of challenges over the years. There has been, it's interesting because there is conflict and tension between the Turkana people and the refugees predominantly coming from South Sudan, but also from a lot of other countries in the region, from Uganda, from Ethiopia, from Somalia, and a little bit from anywhere actually in Africa or the world. Historically, there has been conflict between the Turkana and the Karamojong in Uganda and Toposa in South Sudan. But these conflicts do not spill over to the refugee camp, actually. The tension and the conflict in the refugee camp is mainly around resources like access to water, access to firewood, and those are actually the two main conflict areas. This is an area which is very dry. It's a semi-arid land, and the access to firewood is very difficult. And there are a lot of tension around access to firewood. Also access to water, especially water for the cattle. Turkana are cattle keepers.
Many of the refugees in Kakuma, they came from different kind of conflicts related also to ethnicity, to religion, and minority. And I wonder, how do you somehow account for this background? How do you relate to this background in your work in Kakuma with the help?
It's an important aspect, I think one thing to acknowledge is that the people who come to Kakuma or come to neighboring countries in the region are fleeing from the conflict. So for various reasons, they have basically decided they don't want to take part in that conflict. And Kakuma is a lot of young men. It's often in refugee camps. I've been working in refugee camps for many years. Most of the refugees will be women and children. But in Kakuma, it's different. It's majority actually are men, and many of them are young men who have left the countries they come from, and again, most of them from South Sudan, because they don't want to get involved in the conflict. They don't want to be part of the armed groups fighting each other. But we have a very conscious work both on ethnicity to work together and mix groups that come from different backgrounds or different sides of an ongoing conflict. We also work with the religious leaders from all the different religions that are present in the refugee camp. Of course, it's Muslims and Christians, but also Christians of different denominations within the Christian group. So we work specifically with religious leaders to build peace in the camp. Religion itself is very rarely a source of the conflict within the camp. It's more around, it can be something that people carry with them from where they come from, or also in the camp that because of lack of resources, lack of food, lack of space, conflicts happen. So the religious leaders and also the elders, the traditional elders from the communities are very important people to build peace and to build what we call social cohesion and coexistence. Also with the Turkana, the host community. So we also include Turkana leaders and religious leaders from the Turkana community outside the camp.
Okay. Ola, do you have any questions maybe? Or shall I continue?
Yeah, you talked about different kinds of religions. So could you expand a little bit about the different groups and religions that are present?
The two main sort of religious groups, of course, is, if we divide it, is Muslims, both from South Sudan and from Somalia. There is quite a large Somali community. And Christians, but then within the Christian community, there are Orthodox or more Pentecostal and Catholics, of course, which can also be tension between the different groups. Yeah, so I think that then, of course, there are also older or what we sometimes term traditional religions also present, but a majority are it's still Muslims or Christians
What about
in the camp.
ethnic groups? The different ethnic groups?
Ethnic groups, yes, there are very many different ethnic groups. Of course, from South Sudan, I don't know all of the groups, the main Dinka, Nuer, Toposa, but there are many different groups. And also from all the other neighboring countries. And also, so there are many different ethnicities living together in the camp. And it happens, especially with the groups that come from South Sudan, where the conflict in South Sudan is to some extent along ethnic lines, even if I would say the source of the conflict is more resources and the oil, where people are forced out. But the ethnicity and also the religion is used to create a us and them and to fuel the conflict. So that is brought also into the refugee camp, where young men, then again from one community, Dinka, for instance, and young men from the Nuer community, have this perception of us and them, and that conflict is brought in to the camp. And that can be occasionally that it becomes very serious, especially if there's something happens. It's a lot about resources, or if a Nuer boy dates a Dinka girl, that can be the spark of a conflict, and then that is created. So we also work with something called peace teams or protection teams, which are refugees in the camp who try to mediate or negotiate a conflict before they become violent.
What about the situation in South Sudan? Do you have information, or how does it affect your work?
We also do work inside South Sudan. So we do have quite good knowledge of what's happening, as much as anyone can have. And we follow what's happening there. And of course, right now, the biggest crisis is in the North Sudan, in what is known as the Sudan, with a lot of Sudanese refugees coming to South Sudan. So South Sudan is also hosting hundreds of thousands of refugees from Sudan.
Okay.
And then there are also in the conflict within South Sudan is also resulting in people fleeing from South Sudan to Uganda and Kenya and Ethiopia and so on. So it's a very, very complex situation, with South Sudan both having its own conflict, severe conflict with refugees leaving the country, and at the same time hosting refugees coming from Sudan in the north.
Okay. I would like to ask, how do these reduced aid contributions from Western countries, for example, from America and other places, how does that affect your daily support to refugees in Kakuma and your work there?
The direct impact, which is felt immediately, is that the World Food Programme, WFP, which to a large extent was funded by the United States of America, were funding the WFP. So there has been very severe cuts in the food rations. There is something in humanitarian aid, we say 100% food ration it's a measure which is 2,100 calories per person per day. Is what is the standard norm for a food ration from WFP. So when the funding cuts came, all refugees in Kakuma were divided into 4 categories, with category 1 being the most vulnerable, people who were considered not being able to raise any food on their own, or not having any income, or being chronically ill, and or pregnant mothers, etc. So they were to receive 60% of a food ration, because they couldn't afford to have any more than that. Category 2 were those who was assessed to have some opportunity to have a side income, or raise what they need somewhere else. So they were 40%, category 3 20%, and category 4 would then receive no food at all. But then quite quickly the cuts were felt even further beyond the initial cuts from USAID and the USA. So the food rations were cut even more. So the ones who were initially assessed that they can't actually access income or food outside are only getting 40% of the food needs per day. Category 2, 20%, and the rest nothing. So the food is really the biggest issue, which is also forcing people to return to the conflict zone in South Sudan. A little bit, which is not an immediate effect, but a little bit is that schools have been reduced. We are supporting, together with the Lutheran World Federation, the education system in Kakuma and the schools for refugee children. We have so far decided to keep the schools open, even if there are basically no resources for education. But it's better that the children come to school and are safe during the day. And WFP, the World Food Program, has also so far prioritized to fund the school meals, so the children get at least one hot meal per day. What is also now, because this has now been going on for about 7-8 months, there is no maintenance of the water distribution system, for instance. So when pipe breaks or there's a leakage in the water system, it's not maintained, it's not repaired. So over time, it's not an immediate impact, but over time, the water distribution becomes more and more difficult.
Okay. Also, we have read about the Swedish archbishop. He recently visited Kakuma and made some statements and so forth. And how can such a visit, what kind of impact can such a visit have? What kind of messages does it send to people in Kakuma and the wider world and so forth?
I think it's very important, and the archbishop is very interested in the humanitarian situation worldwide, and takes a very personal interest in that. And I think it's important both in Kakuma, where the refugees, and as I said, we work with the religious leaders, so he met with the religious leaders, he met with the youth leaders. So for them, it's very important to see and to experience that someone like the archbishop from a country far away is concerned about the situation. There were several meetings where you could see that it means a lot to the individual refugees that a person like the archbishop actually comes there and visits them and stays there we were there for 3 days, meeting different groups. And I think that brings hope, and that brings a sense of not being forgotten. And of course, the archbishop has a platform or a voice where he can reach out to the Swedish government, to the Swedish parliament, to different stakeholders who listen when he speaks in a different way than the normal sort of the usual aid organizations speaking. So I think it is important, and I know that he has contacts regularly in Sweden with the minister and with the parliamentarians, and we'll talk about, and he can't talk about now his own experience. I was there, I have seen. It's a different story than saying that someone who works in Africa has told me. He can speak from his own experience, and I think that's very important.
Yeah.
I want to ask about you. You are sent by the Swedish Church and funded by the Swedish Church. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes, I'm employed by the Church of Sweden and sent to manage our office in Kampala. As I said, we have an office, the development part, or development and humanitarian aid department in Church of Sweden, which is called ACT Church of Sweden, has 4 offices outside of Sweden. One is in Kampala, which is where we manage our work in Africa. And then we have one office in Jordan, and one office in Bogota in Colombia, and are opening one office in Asia next year. It's not yet established.
What was it called?
And
It was called ACT. Or...
Act like action, act,
Okay.
ACT, act.
Okay, ACT.
Emphasizing that we are the part of sort of action.
Okay.
Of the Church of Sweden, and our history stems from what you two probably know as Lutherhjälpen or Church of Sweden Aid.
Yes.
And Church of Sweden Mission. Yes.
Okay, indigenous populations and minorities around the whole world are today struggling to somehow get their voices heard, and I wonder how can the Church of Sweden and other actors actually contribute to this, that they are able to have more part in their own decision making and so forth. And how can they?
Yes, we try to do that. We have, apart from now the refugee work, which often, I mean, many refugees are fleeing conflict, which is can be ethnic minorities or religious minorities or resource driven. But we also have what we call a global policy dialogue program, where we try to have a dialogue with policymakers around several issues, and this being one of them. So we work with policy issues, trying to bring the voice of indigenous people from different parts of the world, Latin America or Africa or Asia, to the Swedish Parliament or to the European Union, where we do most of that kind of work. There's been we are also in the COP 30 in Brazil. That we were represented there, of course, which is also very much the whole climate change, and Brazil specifically, issues around indigenous people being forced away in different ways. But I also want to raise another thing that we are doing, which is what we call business and human rights. Business and human rights is not specifically on indigenous people or minority groups, but when businesses violate human rights in extraction, in mining, in oil and other areas, it is very often indigenous people that are that their rights that are abused. And we have a work on business and human rights issues in couple of different together with the Norwegian church in a couple of different countries, in Tanzania recently, and around the mining industry, for example. And we are also working a little bit on the mining in Southern Africa and issues around human rights abuses in the mining industry there.
Interesting.
My last question is really, what kind of long-term solutions can you see for people like those in Kakuma, really, this camp? I and Ola, for example, know a specific person in Kakuma, and I've tried to we try to somehow solve that situation, and they have some contact with, for example, people in Kenya and so on. There might be some employment in Kenya, but there's also suspicion between the Kenyans maybe and the people in the refugee camp. So even if you have contacts maybe in Kenya, it's not very easy to come out of this camp and work in Kenya, really. So there is some kind of trap there. One is, in a sense, trapped in a kind of jail almost, or prison, and it's not easy.
So Kenya have for many years had what we call encampment policy, which means refugees are received in Kenya. There's a huge number of refugees in Kenya from Somalia, from South Sudan, from many different countries. And the Kenyan government receives refugees, but they are only allowed basically only allowed in refugee camps, and there are two large refugee camps, Kakuma and Dadaab on the Somali, near the Somali border. While, for instance, in other countries, in Uganda, the refugee reception the policy has been completely different, where refugees are integrated into the local community and they are given land, they have the right to work. Many refugees in Uganda have, when they have received an ID card, a Ugandan ID card, which they can do quite quickly, they are allowed to work, seek employment, or run the business on their own. Kenya, that is not there yet. But Kenya is looking a lot at the refugee policies of Uganda, and there is something called the Shirika Plan, which has been launched this year. The Shirika Plan, the purpose of the Shirika Plan is exactly to allow refugees to work or run businesses on their own, and to be integrated in the Kenyan system, into the Kenyan schools, Kenyan healthcare, etc. And I think that's the only possible actually way forward to. I mean, of course, we would like conflicts in the first place to be solved, and people don't have to flee. But that continues to happen. So when there are refugees, we talk about three types of solutions. One is that the refugees after some time can return home, which is usually the most sustainable solution, but it's rare. It doesn't happen very often. The other is that they can be given asylum in a third country, like in Europe or in the United States or in Australia, which it has happened quite a lot in the past, but now it's almost a closed door to any resettlement in a third country. So the solution is that the host countries open up and allow refugees to work, or allow refugees to run businesses, to pay taxes. And Kenya is on that path, but they have just launched this, which is called the Shirika Plan, which will take several years to implement, but that is the aim of the Kenyan government at the moment.
I have no more question, actually. I think you have made a very good contribution to our program, really, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was very nice and good to see you.